Hi. I know without any, planned comments, I have notes to be sure. But if you were to ask me, what are the big buzz items, Jim? What's going on? What's front and center? I would have to say, starting with QE. Um, the Fed has made comments in the last month or two, and it's becoming very, very clear. We're in a situation now where I think the Fed is not just going to say we're going back to QE with bond purchase. I think they're going to say we're going to be involved with infinite QE forever. They made a comment a month ago that they were going to make QE a current ongoing policy. That's what I call QE forever. Now they're talking, rumors are floating about going back to QE and maybe expanding it to other things. And I think it's corporate bonds. I think corporate bonds are just a nightmare, not a big can of worms. They're a big can of nuclear waste. Okay, so infinite QE forever seems to be coming. The other big buzz is the dollar. The dollar is now having very widespread rejection that is now working its way into allied nations like Germany, France, and England, setting up INSTEX, the special purpose vehicle for handling funds in transfer with Iran. And they say it's going to be for humanitarian purposes. No, it's going to be for energy sale purposes. Okay, so, and the third thing is Germany. Wow. I made a forecast 2014 and I amplified with louder voice in 2015. I said, as a result of the Russian sanctions and the entire Ukraine theater, the war that the United States and Israel started, Germany's going to flip east. And I said back then, it'll take at least 2 or 3 years. And it started to become much more evident in 2018 when their list of German subsidiaries operating and producing inside Russia to work around the sanctions became a long list. Now, BMW, Daimler-Benz, and a few others they're big industrial corporations, like consumer electronics and things. I'm not sure, but I think Siemens has a plant there. What they do is they buy up an old Russian plant, they retool it, they fix it up, and the American critics say, oh, they'll need 2 years to get that up and running. No, they needed 6 to 8 months to get it running at, partial speed, and by the time 10 or 12 months comes, they're near full speed in production to sell legally in the Russian market. So the Germans aren't taking our guff anymore, and they're quite vocal and defiant about working right through pushing aside the sanctions that we're threatening in Washington for the construction firms and the finance firms associated with Nord Stream. This is very big. The Germans are pretty much flipping the bird to Washington, saying, get out of our business. And our German ambassador, Grinnell, is being called a persona non grata. And the Germans are near the point of booting out the American ambassador. This is unbelievable, Dave. We're alien. I said this a long time ago, like 8 years ago. The United States is going to work itself into a position of global isolation. I said, we'll alienate the East. We'll maybe have, big battles with them as they push for the gold standard. We'll have, sanctions and other problems, like downed airliners, trade battles with ZTE, trade battles with Huawei, and eventually we're going to start attacking our allies because they're going to see the king dollar and its decrepit court crumbling. And in order to survive, European nations, the strongest ones, I said, this was 8 years ago, the strongest European nations are going to break away from the dollar. And we're starting to see it with Germany. It's not just Germany. It's Germany and France and my God, just take a look at the nations in the core of Germany that have demanded repatriation of their gold. It's Germany, it's Netherlands, it's Austria. That's going to be the new European core. That's going to be where the new slimmed down euro currency operates. That's my call. And that's something that, it's not entirely my own thought, but it's coming from the voice. And in order to do that, they need to trim the pig's fat. Portugal, Italy, Greece, Spain, they need to trim that down and have it so that the Southern European nations don't use the same currency as the Germans and Dutch. That's what it's coming down to. And then the Germans are going to say, well, in order to make this a viable currency, in order to stand side by side with the RMB and the ruble, it too must be gold backed. And then we get momentum toward the gold standard. These are the three big buzzes, Dave. QE to infinity forever, the dollar rejection global, and the Germans breaking away from the dollar fold. These are huge initiatives. They're all very important. And they're all going to gain momentum. And I've got this, it's funny when I have conversations and communications with the voice, he told me because of NDAs now, non-disclosure agreement, he can't be so specific. But we have our own method of communicating. And one of my funny ones is I say, here's what I think is going on. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. And if I get silence, that means it's correct. If I get it wrong, he said, no, you got it wrong. It's more like this direction, Jim. And okay, fine. But if I get silence, it means it's like a tacit confirmation. And what I'm hearing is the gold trade note is in operation now, Dave. It is in operation. And I have a suspicion, a deep gut suspicion, confirmed by a couple Jackass colleagues, that the Chinese are using the gold trade note to buy Arab oil, in particular the Saudis.
So wait, when you say the gold trade note, I mean, is this a dollar from the U.S.? Is it from the IMF? Is it? I mean, where is this gold trade note? Who's like the owner? Who created it?
I think the Chinese out of Shanghai with their triangle of gold, oil, and RMB in futures contracts. Okay, remember the first users of the gold oil contract in Shanghai were the Russians. They were selling oil and receiving gold to the Chinese. Okay, then in March of last year, we had the Petro RMB contract, the Petro Yuan, call it what you want. That completed the triangle, oil, gold, RMB. So the Chinese issue, okay, just think of the Treasury bill and everything that's dollar inside it structurally is gold. So it's like, I'll just make something up. It's like a 5% equity down payment in gold to create a $1 billion gold trade note, 5% down, and they use it to purchase. And the other country, let's just say between Iran and China, that's less controversial. So China buys the oil from Iran, and then Iran says, okay, we want a bunch of cars, motorcycles, domestic, electronics, and clothing and housewares. Okay, so they buy $1 billion gold trade note. They back it with gold, 5% margin, and they use that to send to China to purchase containers full of Chinese finished products. At the end of the quarter, they settle up, and maybe it's like, I'll just make up something. It's like $150 million in favor of China, and Iran pays $150 million in gold to China at the end of the quarter. Bilateral quarterly settlement. That's what I'm hearing. And I think we already know that the Import-Export Bank has been working between China and Iran. That's known. And I think the basis has become the gold trade note. I'm just throwing it out there, Dave. No proof. It fits like a glove. And now quietly, the voice told me June, very plain terms, direct conversation in phone, corrected me and said, oh, Jim, the Chinese are already paying RMB for Saudi oil. This has been going on for months. Okay, so how do you formalize such payments? They're paying in RMB. Okay, I think the RMB is going to become a caretaker currency for transition to the gold trade note in trade payment practices. This is the evolution, step by step, toward the gold standard, Dave. And I've been saying this for like 3 years. The first evidence and implementation will be in trade payment. You buy something, you pay for it in gold via the gold trade note. And then after you realize, my gosh, we don't need treasuries anymore. We don't need the treasury bill for our oil shipments. We don't need the treasury bond even for our banks anymore if we're not going to use treasuries for trade payment. And then all of a sudden, the transition begins and gains momentum that banks around the world, especially in the East, where they have reserves. In the West, we have debts. In the East, they have reserves. They start moving their dollars out from the form of treasuries and buy gold. This is how banks are going to be dumping treasuries and buying gold. I think they've been doing it for 2 years. We have lots of stories of central banks accumulating more gold, hundreds of billions of dollars worth of gold. I mean, is it all fresh trade surplus that's being used to purchase, or is it some old bank reserves, the long-term treasuries, treasury notes and bonds? I think it's a little bit of both.
So how does this fit in with the United States? Is the United States, I mean, right now we're on a Federal Reserve note. Are we going to be moving away from the Federal Reserve note and moving towards some type of gold-backed currency here in the United States?
Well, there is still a lot of talk. It's ongoing, and it's rather constant, the chatter about the Treasury note replacing the Federal Reserve note, UST note. And I think this is, again, my logical conjecture, just my analytic gut. I think the U.S. Treasury note is going to eventually merge with the gold trade note. The Treasury note eventually, in order to compete. Dave, this is a matter of competition in order to assure import supply.
I just want to say, when you say Treasury note, is this the Treasury note that the government is created, we the people
Yes.
creating, not coming from the Federal Reserve?
No, Treasury note comes from the Department of Treasury.
Okay, I just want to clear that up.
Yeah, Federal Reserve note comes from the central bank.
Right. Okay.
Pardon me, I got a tickle. The Treasury note is widely discussed as being the replacement for the Federal Reserve note that will essentially kick the Fed to the curb. Now, these are strong words. These are very powerful movements. But since 1913, when the Fed was created, the U.S. government has not been in charge of creating money. What we do is we create debt and then turn to the Fed and say, can you securitize it in the form of bonds? And one of the greatest comedies and ironies is that in the last many years, the U.S. government cannot pass an audit because the Pentagon is in the way. We couldn't pass an audit for Fannie Mae and Health and Human Services either. So the Pentagon and HHS, think of it as Fannie Mae, et cetera, can't pass an audit. So we really don't have the right to issue bonds. But the Fed manages the whole process of issued bonds and covering them. And back in 2012 and 11, a very historical event took place where QE was put on. And, they don't talk about it. They call it financial stimulus. What a crock of shit that is. The QE was put on in order to prevent a treasury bond default because we lost the buyers. After Lehman, we lost the buyers. The East and the other nations in the community, the global community of nations, concluded the U.S. banks are insolvent. The U.S. government debt is out of control. They got fraudulent mortgage bonds, and now they got fraudulent treasury bonds. We don't want to bid on them at auctions. And the Fed and the Department of Treasury got together and said, well, we need to do something because we need to securitize close to $1 trillion a year in debt. By securitize, I mean make a formal security called a treasury bond that can float and change in value and be traded and have a market. So QE was to avoid treasury bond default and to create liquidity for the Wall Street banks who wanted to dump their treasuries to a toxic vat, and the toxic vat was the Fed. Now the Fed has like $3 trillion in toxic treasury bonds. And after 6 full years of QE, my forecast, my analysis has been verified that they destroyed the bond market. And evidence is not just seen in the treasury bond. Evidence is seen in the corporate bonds. We now have banks that recently declared $252 billion in unrealized losses. These are bonds of various types. They're also credit portfolios. We have $2.8 trillion in triple B, barely investment grade bonds for corporations. I've got 2 Jackass colleagues. One of them is Sky Crane, another one is Euroraj, and they both say the same thing. We're going to be looking at a 12-month period where close to $1 trillion the next 12 or so months, maybe 12, 18 months. We're going to be looking at $1 trillion of triple B corporate bonds being downgraded to junk. Triple B is already 53% of all corporate bonds. This is astonishing. The movement from A rating to triple B in the fourth quarter was the largest shift since 2015. We're going to junk. Remember the Euro Central Bank. This was about a year ago, maybe a little more than a year ago. The central bank in Europe declared we're going to be moving toward coverage of corporate bonds in Europe. That was a sign that they not only destroyed the Euro bond market in Europe, but they were beginning to see rot on the edges of the corporate bond market. The rot is very evident in the United States and with General Electric and General Motors. It's very evident in Europe with Deutsche Bank. So what's coming next, Dave, in this infinite QE forever is they're going to start to cover corporate bonds, and they're not going to be lying about it. It's going to be done in the open. And the Euro Central Bank will do the same thing, and they'll use dollar swap facilities to make sure that it's all fully liquid. And the Treasury bond is going to get covered. We're on track now for at least $1.3 trillion in federal deficit this year. The figure is $537 billion in just the first 5 months. It's getting worse. So if you do a straight line extrapolation, that's a conservative figure of 1.3 trillion. It could get worse, could be 1.4. We're now on a declared $870 billion in trade deficit for the last 12 months. Now, I want to put this into perspective because I like to say that there are 3 requirements for the U.S. to get on the gold standard. That is, 1, you must cover a majority, not all, not necessarily, but get a big giant portion of the 22 trillion covered in the debt. The second is you must source the gold. They need a lot of gold, and I'll tell you why in a minute in the next point. They need a minimum of 10, 12,000 tons of gold. And the Chinese won't lease it to them anymore because we reneged on the last one in 2005. It was initiated in 1999 when Hong Kong was turned back to the British. Okay, the third requirement is we need to set up U.S. industry. We need to reindustrialize, which was a campaign promise of Trump. But the military got in the way and said, no, let's increase the military budget. So we continued with the endless war theme instead of reindustrializing. That convinced me that Trump might have one foot in a very legitimate and legitimate pond with integrity, but his other foot is still in the Goldman Sachs and military pool. Okay. The third point is that we must reindustrialize, and here's why. If we continue with this trade deficit, which last year was around 600 billion, and this year is going to be closer to 850 billion, at a $1,300 gold price, it translates now not to 1,000 tons of gold, but to more like about 1,300 or 1,500 tons of 1,000 tons of gold. The trade deficit would mean in the first year, under the current status of our trade deficit, we would shed and forfeit on the order of 15,000 tons of gold. So do you really think we're going to be moving toward the gold standard before we reindustrialize? I don't think so. Therefore, I think we're going to have a fraudulent gold-backed dollar. Trump talks about having a new wave of U.S. industrial power. He talks about artificial intelligence. He talks about optics. He talks about telecom. He talks about robotics. He talks about, advanced super chip technology, supercomputers. A lot of really, they're not woo-woo either. They're real and they're now. But we don't have the capital to create the businesses. And we're going around the world, creating alienated allies like Germany. You think Germany's going to really want to invest $1 billion here, $1 billion there, $10 billion there in plants to build cars or electric vehicles or networking gear or whatever? No, and they're not going to. They don't trust the United States. So the United States is in a corner, and that's why I think we're at risk of falling in the third world. We need to reindustrialize. There's a lot of chatter that I hear, well, Trump is trying to keep the stock market pumped up because we need that capital, even though it's like, false valuation. We need that capital to shift over and to become, with federal incentives, new capitalized businesses, plant equipment, not just, like plant and equipment to retool and make a car. I mean, like plant and equipment to, manufacture fiber optics, telecom gear, robotics, and a lot of advanced stuff. They need capital for it. The capital might be located in the stock market. It's false value notwithstanding. That'd be a great shift of false value into true, real future value. Industrial equipment, industrial setup with businesses. We're at a flux point, Dave. We better get our act together toward a gold standard because I expect we're going to make, the same old Looney Tune bullshit arguments that we're backing our new dollar, the new treasury dollar, with 12,500 tons of gold, and it's located in Fort Knox and West Point, the U.S. Army, military academy for the Army, and it's located in deep storage gold in Nevada Hills and Grand Canyon, and we're going to get our bluff called. The big issue is going to be independent auditing. And I think we're going to try to force the independent auditing to be our own buddy auditors. Like, look at Moody's, S&P, and Fitch. They're all rigged. Why are they rating U.S. government debt as AAA? I don't even think it deserves triple B, but let's start with triple B. My gosh, S&P almost got its CEO assassinated for knocking down the credit rating one notch in A ratings. I think that was back in 2013. And they don't do that anymore because they don't want to die young. We're going to have falsified audits of the gold that backs our new treasury dollar. Look at what Mnuchin did a year ago. He visited Fort Knox and he said, it's all there. The gold's all there. What did he look at? I'll tell you what he looked at. Gold-clad tungsten bars. Row after row after row after row. The only gold we have there, from what I get, and this is from about 3 different sources, the only gold we have there are 2 barrels. I mean, like big-ass beer barrels, 4 feet high and 2 feet in diameter, full of old legacy gold coins. Okay, that might be worth a couple $1 billion. Maybe it's 3. It sure as hell ain't 600 billion or 800 billion to cover 1 year of trade deficits. And if we're on the gold standard and we continue to import like crazy, we're going to have 2 risks. We're going to have to ship the gold to cover it because we're net very negative. And secondly, they're going to finally say, we don't want to import to you anymore because we don't want your phony treasury bills and we don't want your phony new treasury bills backed by fake gold. And they're going to challenge for European and Asian independent auditors for Fort Knox. And if they drill holes in them, they're going to find a black metal called tungsten. Whew. So go ahead.
So how are we as a people here in the United States, how are we going to have a gold-backed treasury note if we don't have gold?
We're going to fake it. We lie right now. Anyway, we lie with everything. We lie about our federal budget deficit. We call it 560, and it's over $1 trillion. We got one-off items we don't even count. Emergency funding, eventually, when it is funded and covered, does not become part of the budget deficit. We lie about everything. We had a new law about 5 years ago that said that systemically important financial banks can lie and falsify their accounting in order to survive. We've institutionalized fraud in finance.
So then
in the United States.
If we are, I mean, you don't think, let me just start off with this. You don't think there's any gold anywhere here in the United States?
Sure, but it's in private elite hands. They don't want it to go into Federal Reserve hands because they know if we go on the gold standard, it'll be shipped right out the door in 1 quarter.
What about gold that hasn't been mined yet here, maybe in national parks and things like that?
That's real. But what are you going to do? Is China going to say, well, okay, we'll continue to engage in trade with you, but we want quarterly settlement, and we don't want your tungsten bars. We ship thousands of them to Hong Kong banks. That was just like a warning to China that we can do stuff like this. We can mess you up. And now we're redeeming it. It's so funny. Take a close look at the quarterly Department of Commerce line items for trade, and you see industrial supplies and metals. Sticks out like a big giant thumb in the whole sheet. It's like a couple billion or $1.5 billion per month. We're doing restitution with Hong Kong. It's U.S. to Hong Kong. What the hell is industrial supplies and metals? What is the $1 billion, $1.5 billion, $2 billion a month? What is that? No, it's restitution for tungsten bars during the Clinton administration. That's what it is. Okay, they don't trust us. So what is the United States going to do? We're going to lie. We're going to do what we always do with finance. We're going to lie, and we're going to force them to call our bluff. And when they say we want an independent Asian and European auditor to check Fort Knox, they're going to rush in some real bars, and they're going to steer them into a certain room and say you can't go to the other rooms, and they're going to falsify the audit. And when they're all done, they'll ship out the good bars, replace them with tungsten bars, and the charade will continue. And if China says, we want to mine the Newmont properties in Nevada, we might say, okay, that'll be good for U.S. employment. It's not going to cover the deal. It's not going to cover the deficit. It's not going to cover the problem. And the United States is going to be forced to deal with something very ugly, import supply shortages. And that might finally kick our ass in gear to realize we need to make housewares. We need to make more cars. We need to make more car components. We need to make more cell phones. We need to do it on the U.S. soil. We need to make incentives to reindustrialize. We have so many factors that are going to push us into a corner to reindustrialize. It's becoming a comedy. It's a tragic comedy. The United States is in deep, deep shit. And we need to industrialize. We need to grab a lot of corrupt wealth using RICO laws and using the, oh gosh, I can't think of the name. The federal government just came up with a new law. It's like a federal omnibus. Oh, the omnibus law. The omnibus law is the federal and international version of the RICO law. RICO is a racketeering, investment, corruption, or an organization, or whatever. Racketeering law for asset confiscation. Costa Rica is a little different. You get, I know somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody, and he got caught for moving cocaine, and he lost his entire house. He lost his beach house. He lost 3 cars. He lost all his bank accounts, and that was just to begin. That was in 1 month. Okay, so they use the RICO law here in Costa Rica. The omnibus law. We need to use the omnibus law. There are reports, and very hard to substantiate, but there are reports that Trump has captured at least $5 trillion of corrupt elite money and will devote it toward reducing the federal debt. It's $22 trillion. Okay, let's just say it's $5 trillion. Let's say it's 7. Okay, that'll make it $15 trillion. All right, $15 trillion. We could create a new dollar that's gold-backed with 15. If we say we got more coming, it'll be down to 10 before long. We can't continue in the present path without backing it, because we now have a reputation that our bondholders will never be repaid. That's the new reality.
A while back, you said that the gold-backed Treasury note was going to kick the Fed to the curb. I mean, if we don't have gold, is it possible maybe to have the Fed destroyed when we have this audit of, okay, let's look at where the gold is. It's not there. Who's to blame? And they track it down, finding out that maybe the Fed and other individuals stole the gold from the people. And this brings down the Fed. I mean, how is it going to kick the Fed to the curb?
You mentioned a very likely scenario for abolishing the Fed, that they have been engaged in criminal activity. Not just, I'm going to focus on gold in a minute, but let's talk about other things the Fed has done that's criminal.
Okay.
How about the New York Fed, for like 15 years under Dudley, engaged in insider trading in the stock market? That's significant. It's in the billions for their dirty and dark profits. Let's talk about their wink and nod of the MERS, the Mortgage Electronic Registry System, for how the Fed they were involved because the Fed was buying mortgage bonds. The Fed was buying Fannie Mae bonds. The Fed was buying, they have a name for them, primary label mortgage bonds. And the Fed was involved with collusion for the falsification and the corruption of the MERS database. That's another criminal activity. The Fed is involved in dishing out near zero, let's just call it 0.25% loan totaling $23 trillion. There was a result of the Ron Paul-led audit that they caved in on. That was $23 trillion to the Fed owners. $23 trillion in near 0% loans to the Fed owners. Do they have any plans for repayment? Is it even written in the contracts for repayment? Or was there no contract for repayment, in which case it was counterfeit theft? The crimes of the Fed are extensive. Was the Fed involved in any of the murders of J.P. Morgan executives in London? Or was that all the Russian mafia? There's an old saying that The Voice taught me. If it's a clean hit, it's done by the Vatican hitmen. If it's sloppy with a lot of blood, which includes jumping out a window or being tossed out of a window, the fractured skull has a pool of blood that's 3 feet in diameter. Did you know that 30% of your human body blood is located in your skull? Nothing but a big vat of blood and a lot of synapses. The Russians are involved in revenge murder of London bankers for losing them money. When you get the nail gun to the head and they call it a suicide, that's the Russian mafia. When you have 2 gunshots to the head ruled suicide, I mean, how did that second one occur? Oh, the suicide guy wanted to make sure he was dead. That's Russian mafia. They like to be sloppy. They like to put the testicles in the guy's mouth. That's what they like to do. The Fed is so vulnerable for criminal charges that it's not even funny. So I think the Fed is going to get shut down, and what's going to happen is it's going to become a Department of Treasury office, and the Fed owners are going to be removed. And it could very well be, and I'm going to get to my little quick analysis, analytic point. The voice told me 3 years ago, the target will be the second level, middle level elites. They're going to be removed. They're going to be flipped to cooperate. They're going to be stripped of their wealth, or they're going to be killed by the Triad, which is a Hong Kong-based Chinese mafia. A year ago, he told me that 90% of the middle-level elite cabal has been eliminated or converted. That makes the top vulnerable. So it could be that the owners of the Federal Reserve have no more lieutenants and captains to carry out their missions. And they're really stuck just, hiring the Bush crime family to down an airplane like in Ethiopia or, the Ethiopian airline. Okay. Now, regarding gold, what happened with the gold? Is there a crime there? Well, hell yeah. I got word in 2010. I remember this because I remember where my office was and what window I was looking out when I had the conversation with the voice. He said, do not write about this, but put it in your head. File it away. Bush and Clinton were stealing the Federal Reserve held gold, the U.S. government treasury holdings, reserve gold holdings. Bush and Clinton stole it and bought out the Englehart refinery in Western Canada, which just happened to be located very close to a tungsten mine. They were working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 per year in recasting tungsten bars with gold clad, shipping them primarily to Hong Kong to screw with China, and also shipping some to the big German banks, but mostly like 10 to 1, 20 to 1 to Hong Kong. And they were stealing the gold. Okay, they stole the gold and replaced it with tungsten bars and shipped them in the open market. And you saw lots of stories in the London and New York City jewelry centers, the jewelry districts, where they were, drilling a hole into a beautiful pamp and finding tungsten in the middle. Okay, so it's all through the system, the falsification. Okay, this is Bush Clinton. He furthermore told me, do not publish this. They were using the Clinton-Bush Panama, Arkansas connection to move the real gold. The same connection that they had for cocaine and heroin. So, I guess it was about 4 or 5 months later, Rob Kirby, he's a very courageous man, he went public and talked about it in very plain terms about the cocaine routes to Panama from Arkansas, Mena Air Force Base. All those stories are true. They killed a couple kids who were witnesses, cut their heads off, and claimed that they fell asleep on the railroad track and had their heads cut off. Yeah, that happens all the time. The number of Clinton murders to cover up this and, campaign violations, campaign fund violations, and other things. The list is up to about 115 murders now. This is one of the most murder-strewn presidential families in U.S. history. Okay, so the crimes will be easy. There's a lot of rumor that Team Trump recovered and found the Fort Knox gold, and it was in the Pacific Rim. I can't remember either Indonesia or Malaysia. I just mentioned them both because sometimes I can't keep them straight. I know Indonesia has the huge Grasberg gold mine, and there's a lot of battling going on for that, for ownership rights. It's the cabal versus the white hats. White hats being, good and honorable people. Cabal being the banksters. There's murders going on in the Pacific Rim. A lot of murders for recovering treasure troves, for maintaining them in secret locations, for killing off managers who have secret information regarding the locations and who have been, siphoning some of the funds. The attorneys are being murdered, and Neil Keenan was murdered regarding the legacy gold-backed bonds. It's a nasty. So when you say, I don't know exactly what your question was, but can the Fed be kicked to the curb for criminal violations? The answer is yeah, like on 17 different counts, and the main ones being fraud and theft. I don't know what you call it. It's not grand larceny. Grand larceny, by definition, is something like over $1,000 in a theft. I don't know what they call it when the theft is over $1 billion. Super grand larceny?
Yeah,
we don't have a name for it, but usually, here's my joke. If it's more than 1,000, it's grand larceny and you get 10 years in prison. If it's over $1 billion, it's super grand larceny and you're nominated for the presidency.
So if we kick the Federal Reserve to the curb, that means the U.S. dollar is going to be replaced by the Treasury note, which is gold back. What happens to the other private Western central banks like the ECB and the others? I mean, do they fold also? Do they continue on?
That's a very good question. I think that as the Fed goes, so goes the nation of franchise central banks. Now, the Bank of England might be unique, and the Euro Central Bank might be unique. But if they are stuck, here's where rubber hits the road, Dave. The Euro Central Bank is in the same position as the Fed. They're sitting on even more, like $4.5 trillion worth of toxic sovereign bonds and other bonds. They've got mortgage bonds. They've got corporate bonds. They started the corporate bond purchase almost 2 years ago. They've got a lot of toxic bonds. I'm curious how much of Deutsche Bank bonds do they have? They're worthless. Okay, so you wonder if they will follow suit and become agents for another, like a euro gold-backed currency. I ask a more simple question. Will they die from bankruptcy?
Will they?
I think they're on the verge of dying from bankruptcy right now. And that brings me to a very important point. Item number 4 on my list. I'm getting to my points on a scattered basis. At the end of this month, which is March 31st on a Sunday, April 1st, golly, I hope it's not an April Fool Day. April 1st, we're going to see the Basel rule kick in, where gold is considered a risk-free asset in banking, reserves, management, and accounting. What
does that mean for those people that are, who are not into the Basel gold rule? Like, what does that mean for gold?
Well, first of all, let's get to what it means for the bank.
Okay.
The bank, for all these years, has been fighting and complying with the US-UK tag team of banksters. And they've been saying, okay, we'll go along. The only thing that can count in bank reserves for all these years, I don't want to say when it began, because I'm not exactly sure. I think it goes back to the 70s when we got off the gold standard. but it could have been like a specific rule in the 80s. But for a long time now, over 30 years, the only bank reserves that count in their asset ratio management and enforcement is treasuries, euro bonds, UK gilts, and probably Japanese government bonds, JGBs. In other words, all the sovereign bonds for the IMF sponsored legitimate currencies. Okay, so why would the central banks want to hold gold when it wouldn't count toward their asset ratios? They wouldn't. If they do, it's all just on the side as a hobby, or maybe in the basement for planning for the future. Planning for the future. Okay, so when gold becomes a risk-free, countable asset for bank reserves management and ratio enforcements, the central banks will be in a position where they can decide, okay, let's get rid of $1 billion of treasuries and buy some gold this month. And next month they can say, that went well. Let's do $2 billion this month. And then the next month they say, we better hurry the hell up because we foresee the treasury bond is becoming pretty close to default status and a restructure. And they might get a haircut of 35%. So what do you say we up it to $20 billion this month and convert treasuries to gold? And while they're doing that, they might do the same thing with euro bonds. And they're going to be dumping left, right, up and down with trucks backing in their mortgage bonds and their corporate bonds. And that is probably how you're going to see a lot of the triple B corporate bonds move to junk. And I stick with my forecast from my two colleagues. I shared the point. I latched onto it and I said, I'm going to post it. I'm going to call it my own and share credit. But I think we're going to see $1 trillion in triple B bonds move to junk, dollar-based U.S. corporates, in the next 12 or 18 months. Maybe not exactly, but it's going to be a giant swath, and it's going to cause very big problems, and it might move the Fed to embrace the corporate bond buying in what I call the infinite QE forever. Infinite meaning, well, they're going to buy more mortgage bonds. They've been buying crude oil contracts to try to rescue the Wall Street banks. They needed a $75 price to avoid massive losses. Probably part of the $252 billion in unrealized losses from the major U.S. banks, the depository institutions. Okay, so we're going to have to move toward the gold standard, and we cannot unless we reduce the debt, source the gold, and reindustrialize. We need to make some progress. We might have some good progress on reducing the debt with seized elite assets using the omnibus rule, the omnibus law, but I don't think we're going to be able to find the gold. And, you know, if you're an elite son of a bitch like from the Bush family, you're going to be trying to cut deals. They're going to say, we will not do a dirty nuke of Dallas, Los Angeles, Chicago, and Miami, and Philadelphia. We will not do a dirty nuke if you back off on trying to confiscate our gold. This is where it's coming to. It's unbelievably dangerous and dirty.
Jim, let me
We will not assassinate these 10 leaders in the U.S. government unless you back off on confiscating the Bush family $5 trillion or more in assets, unless you back off on trying to confiscate our gold. Back off. So they're going to back off. We need to eliminate the middle-level Bush family lieutenants and captains, and it's not easy to do. I hear that they've seized some. I got a funny story, Dave. Why did Jeb Bush back out of the presidential race in the summer of 2016?
Why?
Because the White Hats did a preliminary move to eliminate some of the Trump competition in the Republican Party by cutting off the narco line with Saudi Arabia, which was funding the Jeb Bush campaign. So what did Jeb Bush say was the reason that he backed out? Oh, I got, less in the way of campaign contributions, but I don't like the way Trump is bad-mouthing and criticizing my mommy.
Yes, I remember that.
Yeah. It was cutting off the Afghan-Saudi-Bush narco connection. So why did Prince MBS in the following year arrest a bunch of Saudi royals, Saudi businessmen, all of whom were accused of siphoning from the Saudi till? Maybe because they were low on funds from the cutoff of narco from the Bushes. Bandar Bush is all part of that. Prince Bandar, nicknamed Bandar Bush because he's so tight with the Bushes. Okay, we've got to get going. And I think we should start with industrial development in the United States with tax incentives. And we're not doing anything. I mean, I pointed out 3 years ago in the Hattrick letter, there was a little Alabama firm, 200 employees, run by a couple Chinese folks, Chinese capital. And they were outputting copper tubing. And a third of the output, 40% of the output was going to China, copper tubing. And they had incentives, income tax breaks, property tax breaks. Those are the common things you do in tax-free zones. We need to do this on a massive scale of developing 20,000 new businesses a year across the United States. Many states have free trade zones where they offer tax breaks, like what I described, property tax, income tax. It's not forever. It could be, but it tends to be for the first 3 years. You get them up and running. And then when they're up and running, they're profitable. They're export machines. They're reducing the trade deficit. This is what the Chinese-run Alabama firm is all about now. They're making profit. They don't have big fringe benefits or huge executive pay scales. They don't have big pay scales for the workers, but they're living wages. They're workers. They got some fringe benefits, maybe some HMO for health care, and it's 50% subsidized. I don't know, but you could do lots of things to attract workers. And I think these are going to largely be Chinese unless we destroy our relationship with China, which we're pretty much doing right now. Okay, there's nothing strategic. There's nothing like a Huawei chip or a ZTE super chip. There's nothing like that in copper tubing. The Chinese already own a number of Texas and California farms. They're shipping a lot of output to China. There's nothing strategic about a cell phone. Well, unless you want the backdoor entry. Golly, what hypocrisy, Dave, for the whole Huawei controversy. We say that China's using them as devices to spy on Americans. No, we don't want the Huawei because they refuse to put in the Langley chip for the instant backdoor access like you have on your PCs with the Wintel combination. All U.S. cell phones have the back door. I think Nokia in Europe has the back door. Huawei does not, so now they're bad boys. Persona non grata, we don't want your products because you're going to use it to spy on us. No, because we cannot use it to spy everywhere. Oh, incredible hypocrisy is coming forth. And, we're getting nailed. Not the U.S. corporate names are going to get smeared. Boeing is being smeared now. Apple is not exactly getting smeared. Apple is getting kind of downgraded in its reputation rather than integrity. They're being known now as the second best, but much more expensive. And that's a bad combination. It leads to sales losses. Personally, I like Samsung. Nothing controversial there. And funny little story. When ZTE got blocked for their chip supply, they quickly turned to Samsung in South Korea and got it replenished. Nothing lost. So all we did was we lost trade with China, and we forced them to do it with South Korea. Maybe the goal is Latin America, South America, the United States, and Canada. We're all going to be one big happy family and take care of ourselves and be self-sufficient. And all of Eastern Europe with the Pacific Rim and Taiwan and Thailand and all those countries, they're going to be one big happy family and work together in a trade zone. And that's possibly going to be the way it turns out, where if I'm looking for credit, I'm going to be like in 6 or 8 years from now, I'm going to have to turn to a Panama bank because I won't be able to turn to an American bank or a European or a British bank. It'll have to be something within the whole American hemisphere, which leads to a very big question. What's going to happen with Australia and New England? Well, they'll probably remain in the British Commonwealth and get their access to credit from the British banks. But how healthy will they be? Right now, the British, I mean, I'm wandering around here, sorry, but it's all kind of interesting. The British banks are in kind of a desperate mode with this Brexit. They can't stop the exit. And I think they're going to be struggling to compete with Frankfurt with an RMB trading hub. An RMB trading hub does two things. It enables conversion of currency to RMB, which facilitates trade. And it also is a center for RMB-based bonds. Think of a panda bond. I'd love to give Italy as an example. They're going to need to float a lot of debt, but they might float it in RMB terms to attract Chinese money without the currency risk. So the bond will be written in RMB terms and trade in RMB terms later, but it will instantly finance a gob of Italian debt. That's already happening. Now what we might see is the Frankfurt RMB hub could be a central ground for two things: European debt finance from the pigs nations. Where's Greece going to finance their debt? Where's Portugal? They might do it through Frankfurt as China colonizes commercially Europe. They're bidding right now on 4 ports: Ravenna, Trieste, Palermo, and Genoa. Hey, nice memory, because I wrote it last night. The Chinese are going to be bidding on 4 Italian ports. The Italians want the business. The United States is telling them don't do it. Why? Because they'll be joining the Eurasian trade zone in a big way. Maritime ports. Wow. Italy wants to become major port facilities for the Eurasian, for EU. And as it melds with Asia, it is the Eurasian trade zone. Eastern Europe is going to just fall in line. Maybe not Poland. Very interesting times, Dave. We're at a critical point on 15 different areas, and we're not making the right decisions on a lot of them. We are making some good decisions, and it's really kind of a reverse chess that Trump is playing. Now, I'll make it. Go ahead.
No, I'm just saying, like, I understand that we have to bring manufacturing, industrialization back to the United States. But we also need to remember is that over these many, many years, the central bank, the deep state, and the rest, the cabal, they've been planning on moving everything out of the United States. So to bring everything back in a snap of a finger is a difficult task. I mean, look, when Trump came out and said, listen, I want Ford to stay here, I want this manufacturing to stay here, they fight against him. They don't say, oh, you know what? Yes, make it easier for us. We'll stay here. They fight it. I mean, Toyota said they're going to be building a new manufacturing plant here. And he's trying to keep GM open and not close down. And he's saying, why don't you close down the plant in China? Why don't you close down the plant in Mexico or some other place? So to bring everything back after the central bank, the cabal, had many, many years of moving everything away, within 2 years to reverse everything, a very difficult task to do. And especially when you still have those players out there that are fighting against you at every turn and everything that he wants to do. I mean, it's very difficult to do all of this. And I think he's done some of it where he's made it possible for some to come back and trying to bring others back. But yes, we have to bring back manufacturing. We have to bring back industrialization. But I don't know if you want to answer that or.
Sure.
Okay.
I'm champing at the bit.
Okay.
The Chinese put in place a 10-year plan. They do it all the time. And the 2030 industrial spectrum, I don't know what their name is. I call it the industrial spectrum. That's part of their plan. And Huawei is a big piece of it. In the United States, we tend at a corporate level to come up with a quarterly plan or a fiscal year plan. I was involved in fiscal year planning at Staples. No, not in a big way, but we had a plan. And I caused some waves there by saying you don't have any kind of a macro forecast for the economy. You just have micro forecasts store by store in regions. And they say, yeah, well, we can't do that. I said, you're telling me that there are no macroeconomic forecasting capabilities in the country? Excuse me. And they invited me out of the room. Okay, the United States could employ, through Trump, a 3-year plan or a 5-year plan. It could include the tax incentives that I discussed. It could involve federal outlays to help certain states to get started. It could involve subsidies to cover some of the lost income tax and property tax that would be forgiven for 3 years. It could involve some training programs that the feds could be involved in. Lots of things the Fed could do instead of funding $130 billion more for weapons. I have a joke that I say, it's not a joke anymore with my father. I said, Dad, you ever get tired of the endless war? I said, isn't that what they talked about in Aldous Huxley, Brave New World? Didn't he talk about Soma, the drug to control the masses? Is that now not heroin and cocaine, if not painkillers? And he said, Jim, those are strong words. I said, I know, Dad. You study literature, but you don't connect it to reality. You remain divorced from reality. Okay, this is what we're doing. We need to get the 3-year plan. We need to get the 5-year plan. We need to make progress, and we need to reduce the military budget. Notice that Trump is doing some very strange things. He's essentially cutting off some trade with China, and he might have an ulterior motive to develop the demand internally and satisfy it internally. In other words, okay, we're going to cut off, say, Apple manufacturing with, what is it called? FinCom? I can't remember the name. Maybe open an Apple plant in the United States. Why don't they want to have an Apple plant in the United States? I'll tell you why. Fringe benefits, higher worker wages, OSHA rules, workman's compensation, and health care. You don't have that in Mexico. That's why they're moving Ford plants to Mexico, GM plants to Mexico. And now there might be a reversal of that trend to bring it back. But we've got to do something about fringe benefits, OSHA, workman comp, and health care, and basic wage scale. Okay, we need to do something about that. Now, Trump just did something, amazing point. He said that the NATO nations must pay 150% of the cost for maintaining military forces under the U.S. uniform. What? Why doesn't he just say, we want you to kick us out and to do it yourselves with the European military? Why doesn't he just say, make that alliance you're threatening with Russian military? The Germans are doing industrial merger with Russia now. Before long, they're going to do military alliance with Russia. They're feeling threatened, and they're getting ready to toss out the U.S. Ambassador Grinnell. Oh, my gosh. So it could be that Trump's motive is to reduce U.S.-based car demand for Mercedes, for BMW, for Audi, for Volkswagen. They got 4 powerful brands. They got other brands, but they're just internal. He might be making moves. And, we need to get this NAFTA 2 cleared up. It's still fuzzy. I don't even want to discuss it, but it's not clear at all. Trump might want to expand 5-fold the U.S. automobile, or double at least, U.S. automobile manufacturing capacity, so we can handle our own demand and be satisfied with second best. If I had an American-made car and it just didn't cost me a lot in repairs and maintenance, I wouldn't object so much, but I much prefer a Toyota. I had a Toyota little truck for 6 years, not one repair. I had a little Toyota Nissan truck for 5 more years, not one repair. Combined 11 years, not one repair. I'm not including maintenance like spark plugs and tune-ups and, change tires, and that's maintenance. Not one repair. Golly. I can't say that about the BMW I had. I had a few repairs of that. The alternator went. The air conditioner conduits, they went. Had to replace air conditioner. I didn't even use it. I had to replace it because it was affecting everything else. Water pumps, that might have been just, maintenance. But gosh, a brake job for a BMW is $1,000. A brake job for a Toyota is what, $300? Come on. BMWs will kill you by maintenance, and people boast of their high cost of maintenance for BMWs. It's anyway. Trump seems to do very strange reverse chess, and I'll mention another one. Put Pompeo out there as Secretary. I don't want to get into a big political discussion, but it's just one interesting example. Put Secretary of State Pompeo out there. Let him screw up. Then we can fire him and either replace him with someone worse to discredit the neocons, or finally put in someone who's constructive. I don't know which direction he's going. I think he's going from bad to worse with his neocon appointments. When he fires Mnuchin, like in the next couple of years or for the second administration, will he be cutting the cord from Goldman Sachs, or will he bring in a more reputable, higher-ranked Goldman Sachs guy like Hank Paulson, which is what Baby Bush did? I got a funny little side story for you. I know I'm, on tangents, but I think it's interesting and stimulating. Why did Baby Bush appoint Jack Snow as Treasury Secretary in 2001, January? He was the executive of CSR Railroad and took a lot of criticism for having very little financial experience. Kind of like O'Neill of Alcoa, who eventually got fired for making numerous comments like the federal budget process is a carnival, it's a circus. Why did Jack Snow get appointed from CSR Railway as Treasury Secretary in 2001? Want to take a guess?
Tell me.
Oh, you're not even going to give me time to sip of water. Remember a year later, the Dubai World Port controversies?
Yeah.
That was all about setting up narco distribution lines. Jack Snow was put in place to establish the Bush-Clinton narco distribution lines away from Panama and Mena Air Force Base in Arkansas, and to use legitimate shipping and probably to bribe owners of U.S. and international port facilities. And they ended up with a little bit of controversy with Dubai World Ports. And I don't know the full details of how it resolved, but it sure went away fast. And then Snow got fired. he made a lot of stupid comments. One that I'll never forget. The sign of a powerful currency in the dollar is difficulty in counterfeiting. Gosh, I thought it was industrial power, economic power, and small deficits and high quality of output. Apparently not. So if we can do the best counterfeit of the dollars, by the way, one of the biggest counterfeiters in the world is Langley.
Mm-hmm.
And here's another piece of trivia for you. What two countries are the best counterfeiters of U.S. dollars, and what is the unit? Like $10 bill, $20 bill, $100 bill. What two countries and what denomination? The best counterfeiters in the world.
I have no clue.
Iran and North Korea. Are they not in the news a lot?
Yeah.
Yeah. They have entire labs in Iran that produce the filaments and all the nifty little things that are required in a $20 bill. You don't see a whole lot of $100 bills in foreign countries, but you see the $20 bills. Although I got friends who take out $20 bills all the time because they're on pension and they're on Social Security, and the first of the month they pull out their money on ATMs and they're all $20 bills. There are no $100 bills on ATMs. No. So anyway, there's a lot of controversy now. A couple of little things. They're not so little. I didn't really finish the Basel Gold thing. Let me close on that if you don't mind.
Go right ahead, Jim.
Okay. Back in the 1990s, the chairman of Basel, Bank for International Settlement, they're often called Basel or BIS. The chairman was named Jelly Zijlstra. Zijlstra was a Dutch banker, and he locked horns with the Americans on a regular basis. He wanted gold to be the primary asset for central banks. And the Americans said, no, the dollar will never be secondary to gold. Gold would be off the books. We're going to make it even not even risk-free. We're going to make it, you can't even count it. And the BIS went along with it, saying, well, we're not going to go against Americans. So fine. Okay. Then William White and Zijlstra. William White was their chief economist in the early 2000 decade. He was around for a good 10 years at the BIS. He might still be around. Don't know his actual role right now. But Zijlstra and William White came up with a plan. They call it the N plan. What is going to happen when this is the quintessential question that they had to resolve and come up with an answer for. What is going to happen when the central bank, the major central banks, are loaded with treasury bonds and other sovereign bonds, and we reach a debt saturation point, and we reach a point where even the sovereign bonds face a high risk of debt default restructure. In other words, let's restructure the debt. Let's, convert it to something else, and let's cut 30% of the value. They call that a haircut in bond world. The question is, what do they do when they're at the end of the debt foundation system for money and banking? The answer that Zijlstra and White came up with is they change the status of gold to become a risk-free asset for central bank accumulation. They load up in quiet terms with central bank purchases of gold bullion. And after they have a sufficient amount, they let the gold price rise 5-fold and then 10-fold. That removes the insolvency condition from the central banks. They're back to solvent. They will use the treasury bonds to buy the gold, and they will probably do what they can to make sure that the gold price stays down as much as possible until they continue and gain a lot of momentum in their accumulation. So my expectation is that in April, we might see a dip in the gold price, but it'll be very temporary because the Chinese will not permit it. The Chinese and Russian hold together at least 60,000 tons, maybe triple that. And they're sick and tired of the U.S. and British dictating the price of gold for their treasured, prized asset. So I think the Chinese are going to take this as an opportunity to let the gold price start its upward march in defiance of all the negative propaganda that's going to come out from the central banks and their flapping gums, who will try to talk down the gold price, and it won't work. 3 years ago, it used to be you knock down the gold price $30, $60, and it took several weeks to recover. And nowadays, in the last year, it's not that long to recover. It's because the Chinese are all over it. It's because the Russians are buying gold in conversion of their oil sales revenue. Exciting times. And now Italy has entered the mix. This is so funny. The Italians are saying, we got the Bank of Italy. We got substantial gold holdings there. We want access to it to create a new lira, to revitalize and remonetize our banking system, and to start anew. In other words, they're declaring war against the European Central Bank, the European Commission, the IMF, and the German banks. Okay, the Italians have their own way of resolving things, and they're going to get some help from the Chinese, like with some funding for acquisition of, maybe 40% controlling interest of 4 of those ports that I mentioned, and includes Sicily. The Chinese are going to be involved. The Chinese are then going to be moving in and saying, well, we want some ownership of your retail malls, and we might even buy Fiat. I mean, I don't know what they're going to do. Maybe they'll buy Lamborghini. Maybe that was why the Lamborghinis all blew up. The Chinese wanted to buy a Lamborghini. Have you ever thought of that? Okay, so the central banks are now in the corner. The Fed and the Euro Central Bank are loaded with what I believe to be worthless sovereign bonds, having converted by means of QE for 6 years, converting the Treasury bond into the new global subprime bond. What happened to the last subprime bond? The mortgages. They got ruined. They got sold off. I mean, you can look at your collateral debt obligations and the CDO squared and all that, all their synthetics and weird stuff that they sold in Wall Street. Those got ruined. Those lost 90% or more in value. Some of them lost 99. Some of them lost 100. But I think the Treasury bond is going to lose 60. It's going to retain 60% of its value. It's going to lose 30 or 40% of its value. That's my expectation. They're going to convert it. I don't know what they're going to convert it to. I don't think it's going to be converted to gold. We don't have enough. We don't have $20 trillion. We don't have, if you have a haircut there, we don't have $15 trillion worth of gold. That's a lot of gold. Just to put trillions into perspective with gold, Fort Knox had about 8,500 tons of gold. It was worth approximately $500 billion. So around 17,000 tons of gold is worth about $1 trillion. These are rough figures. These are napkin figures. Don't hold me to it. But I am pretty damn sure at $1,300 gold price, the $600 billion trade deficit for the United States results in a 13,000 ton forfeiture of gold. That's a lot of gold. It means you got to fix your trade deficit. We're not fixing our trade deficit. It's up to 900 billion now. It's going in the wrong direction because Trump did not reindustrialize. What's he trying to do? Create a crisis where we say we must reindustrialize, where there's a popular consensus? That's my suspicion. He couldn't get the consensus for an emergency status reindustrialization of the nation. He couldn't get it. We need a crisis. And that's not hard to build a crisis because we're so close to it now on so many fronts. But I think the central banks are going to lead the way toward the rise in the gold price to save themselves.
So does this include the Federal Reserve? I mean, will they take the treasuries and purchase the gold?
I don't
Trade
know.
them in?
I think they might. I don't know.
Because if you think about this for a second, if the Federal Reserve follows suit and they do exactly what the other central banks are doing, and they're taking what they have and they're saying, okay, let's bring on gold. And then all of a sudden the Federal Reserve is exposed and now they have the gold. Where does that gold go?
It goes into the creditor hands who hold treasury bonds. Who are they?
Or does the United States take the gold?
I think we're going to really struggle to oppose the transfer of this gold to China and Japan. They each hold $1 trillion worth of treasuries. Or do they? I maintain that Chinese don't have $1 trillion worth of U.S. treasuries. I maintain that they have engineered lots and lots of swaps so that their exposure to the treasuries is low. And when that is sufficiently low in their minds, they're going to bring about a rise in the gold price because they're going to be done shifting their treasury exposure to gold. I think they've got gold swaps with treasuries on contract. So if the gold price doubles, they benefit without a treasury risk. This is very complex. I think the Chinese have hired a lot of very smart people to reduce their treasury and dollar risk.
I agree with you. I think they have.
Look what they've done in Angola. They financed the Angola debt. It's no more than, a handful of billions. And how are they repaid? Angola oil sales, where they collect RMB currency. So the Chinese shift money, send treasury bonds to Angola, wait for the oil sales, and they get their RMB back. Okay. That's nothing but a processing plant with gasoline and crude oil in movement. What are they doing with Nigeria? Same thing. Okay, these are not big numbers. I believe it was something like $5 or $7 billion that Angola received from China. We're talking about $1 trillion. If it's 5, you need 200 Angolas. I got into a dispute about 5 years ago with a good friend of mine. He said, Jim, I don't think the Chinese have $1 trillion of exposure. Look at all their investment in Africa. I think it's all spent. And I said, well, wait a minute. Now, if it's, $1 trillion, $1 billion here, $1 billion there, $5 billion there in Nigeria, in Zimbabwe, in Union South Africa, and maybe even in Congo, add them all up, as I did a few months ago, and I got 80 billion. So where's the other 920? And he said, well, you make a good point, but how about Panama? I said, okay, add 5 more. Where's the other 915? These are good arguments. I mean, I'm a mathematician. I don't usually flunk arithmetic. I'm dealing with logarithms, I got so many little funny math questions that I ask people and knock them off balance. And here's one of my favorite. If you wipe your butt and you only remove like 80% of the filth, how many times do you need to wipe your butt in order to have 98% clean? I mean, I have a lot of fun with my math. I have a collection in my drawer of just fun math problems. And I ran out of fun math problems a year ago, and I'm struggling now to find like the determinant of a four-sided, like a parallelogram. Its determinant is its area, and the determinant of a three-dimensional object using its coordinates, three-dimensional determinant, is its volume. I just work on a lot of different fun problems. The area swept out from an equal angle on a circle, the area is equal. But that's also true of a hyperbola, sweeping out an angle. The hyperbola going out toward an asymptote, way out and way out. The angle swept. It's not a circle, but it's still a constant amount for a constant angle, no matter what the angle is, no matter where it starts, no matter where it ends. Fun little math problems. I just try to keep my mind working, Dave.
Yep.
Because I'm working in some quantitative problems, but these are qualitative problems. Like How's the dollar going to be rejected? What are the climax points for its rejection and creating a new dollar? These are not statistical models. I'm not in the Staples office anymore, working a model and trying to do a forecast to understand, price elasticity for altering price and increasing profit. Drop the price, increase the profit. That's the problem that I solved back in 1998. That was a fun project at Staples, and it netted $23 million.
Well, Jim, listen, I really appreciate you coming on the X22 Report Spotlight. Once again, how can people see your work and get in touch with you?
The website is new. Since the last time I was on, I've had a new launch. It's www.golden-jackass.com. It's got a hyphen in there now. It's a new look and feel. It's a wider format. It's more friendly with the handheld devices. I love it. And I've got a new European web manager who's more accessible, and he's just a Sharpie. And my other one was sharp, but she got stuck with Microsoft Tools. And that's, kind of a primitive method for making a website. We now have a WordPress website. Now we're working out very minor kinks, and we made the transfer in January, and naturally, little. I don't want to get into details on what happened, but that's okay. It's up and running now. It's golden-jackass.com. We have an area in there for public interviews, like this, for public articles, like one I recently posted, to explain how gold is going to benefit from QE, from Shanghai Gold Exchange, and from the BIS rules. We're now at the point where gold is ready to launch and to end this 5 or 6 year correction. Okay, so golden-jackass, and got a newsletter called the Hat-Trick Letter. It's reasonably priced. I've kept the price constant since 2008, Dave, and I got a number of people saying, you really should raise your price. I said, no, the economy is getting more difficult. It's a good idea to keep it where it is. The economy is not in good shape, and we're in our 13th consecutive year of recession in the United States. They're lying by the amount they lie. Okay, shadow government statistics just came out and said we have a 9% inflation rate. The U.S. government comes out and says it's 2%. The lie is 7%. Then they say that we got 2% growth for the economy. Subtract 7. We got a 5% recession this year. We're having a 3, 4, or 5% recession every single year. We're calling it sluggish growth. You can't be on a mainstream financial news interview without promising to talk about the growing economy and the low unemployment. We have neither. We have an unemployment rate of about 23%. We have an economy that's negative 4%, give or take. And we have what's the third one? Jobless. Oh, I think I hit them all. Jobless rate, inflation, and GDP. Yeah. So the inflation has been 8 to 10% steadily. We even dropped the oil price, and it had very little impact on price inflation. It's because of shortages and lost production capacity and a lot of problems.